Final Fantasy V is a step back in terms of narrative strength and character development from Final Fantasy IV. This is kind of disappointing, especially since we have a rather small cast in Final Fantasy V. There are only 5 characters that join your party over the course of the game. You may think that a smaller cast would allow for a deeper dive into these characters, but that's just not really the case. Even so, I wanted to take some time to rank the characters of Final Fantasy V. While I didn't love the game as much as I did Final Fantasy IV, it was still an enjoyable entry, and I find it quite enjoyable to share my favorite and not so favorite characters from the game. Be warned though that there will be spoilers here as I talk about the characters. While I do try to avoid spoilers in my reviews, lists like these just don't really work the best if you're trying to avoid spoilers. So if you don't want story elements spoiled, then you may want to avoid watching the video. At number 5, I have Kryll. She is Galuf's granddaughter, who is also trying to stop the return of Exdeath. You first see her in visions or flashbacks of Galuf when he is still struggling with his memory loss. You don't actually meet her until you're trying to protect the Earth Crystal. She uses her magic to free King Tycoon from being controlled and reunites with Galuf. Unfortunately, even with her help, the Earth Crystal is destroyed and the seal on Exdeath is broken. For a good portion of the game after this, she continues to help the party kind of behind the scenes. She helps find them after they are blasted away by Exdeath's barrier on the big bridge. She gives them information and also tries to save them from Exdeath at the Great Forest of Moor. She joins the party after this event due to the death of Galuf. She gains all of his abilities and levels and takes his place in the party. While I did like Kryll, I just felt that she lacked a lot of development beyond being Galuf's granddaughter. There does seem to be a theme of loneliness with her that gets developed a little bit because she's lost her parents at a young age and then loses her grandfather during the events of the game. This theme really comes out with her being the main voice of the epilogue, with her wondering if she had been forgotten about by the other 3 Light Warriors. The only problem with this is that this is kind of developed in the epilogue where it's like the end of the story, and you don't really get that quite as much during the game, so it feels a little less impactful in my opinion. I don't dislike Kryll, but she just feels a bit underdeveloped and tacked on. It feels like they just needed someone to replace Galuf after his noble sacrifice, and Kryll was really the only feasible option for that. At number 4, I have Bartz. Now, it may be a bit weird to see the main character of Final Fantasy V so low on the list, but Bartz was a character I just didn't really get too connected to. For being the main character of the game and the only party member that is always a part of the party, I just felt like he wasn't a very well-developed character. To start with, I found it super odd that the main hero of the game kind of turns down the invitation to kind of start the quest to help save the world. Not that they quite knew that that was what was going on at that point, but when Lena asked him to join her to go to the Wind Shrine with her and Galuf, he doesn't do this. And there isn't really any great reason behind him rejecting this invitation. He just doesn't really feel like it. Bartz is kind of presented as this free spirit that wanders around doing whatever he wants. Now, his Chocobo Boko has more sense of responsibility than he does at the start of the game because he kind of guilts him into like actually helping them and being like, why did you reject their offer to kind of go with them? So yeah, like it's just not a great start for Bartz. And as the story does go on, you do get to learn a little bit more about him. Both of his parents are dead. His mother died of illness when he was young, and then he traveled with his father until he died 3 years ago. We do learn later that his father was also one of the 4 warriors called the Dawn Warriors that sealed Exdeath in the first place 30 years ago. And while these details are interesting, I didn't feel like any of them had a very large impact on the story. When that detail gets revealed, it's kind of because Bartz was able to do some fancy ability when fighting the werewolf leader, but it's not like an ability that he could do in battle or anything, so it didn't really feel like connected to anything else. It just felt like this kind of one little thing that he does in this one specific incident, but doesn't really carry over to anything else in the game. They're interesting little details, but they don't really develop Bartz as a character that much, or change the direction of the narrative, or get reflected in the gameplay, or anything like that. Bartz just felt like a pretty generic main character, to be honest. There really isn't much that makes him stand out, and he can be a bit dense at times, and even just kind of, as I said, like where he rejected the invitation to kind of go on this quest to try to figure out what's going on with the world in the first place, he kind of rejects it, so it's not even like he has this sense of responsibility. And while that does get developed a little bit over time, that's kind of where his character development kind of feels like it does get focused on. He just is kind of forgettable overall. He can be kind of funny when he's joking around with Galuf or doing some things like that, but overall, I just didn't feel like he stood out as much as you would expect a main character in a Final Fantasy game to stand out. At number 3, I have Ferris. The pirate captain Ferris is a fairly interesting character. You start off the game believing that Ferris is a male character. The rough demeanor and the fact that they're a pirate captain lead you to think that. However, after swimming through a section of the ship graveyard, Galuf and Bartz find out that Ferris is actually a woman. As the game goes on, it is hinted at and finally revealed that Ferris is actually the sister of Lena and named Sarasa. As a girl, she was lost at sea during a trip with her father, and even though she finds out her true identity, she continues to go by Ferris. While Ferris does have an interesting backstory, in seeing her reunite with her sister Lena and her father, at least for a very short time, Ferris is still not developed all that much. I feel like the most developed aspect of Ferris's story is her relationship with the sea dragon Sildra. Seeing Sildra sacrifice her life for Ferris and the party is one of the more emotional scenes of the game, as Ferris just kind of mourns the loss of this friend she's had since she was a little girl, and probably was like one of the biggest connections of her life. And while Ferris is a bit more interesting than some of the characters, once you learn who she is and what her backstory is, there really isn't all that much more development for her as a character or in connection with the larger story. She's basically presented as a strong woman who isn't all that interested in adjusting to her identity as a princess of Tycoon. With her interesting backstory and connection to Sildra, she does make it to the middle of my list though, and I did really like her as a character. She's just, like all the characters kind of in this game, just not developed as much as I maybe would have liked. At number 2, I have Galuf. Galuf starts the story off shrouded in mystery. How is he connected to the meteorite that landed? Who is he? What is he trying to do? We don't know any of that because he has amnesia. While some may not enjoy the use of amnesia here because it kind of can be an overused trait, especially in the RPG genre, I felt that it worked well to preserve the mystery of the story, but also give us a way of having details emerge as Galuf remembers various things on your quest. While Galuf doesn't remember who he is for a good portion of the game, he's still a funny older character, as he has a really funny sense of humor and comes out with some of the strangest sayings over the course of the game. As he regains his memory, you realize he came to this world to stop the return of the warlock Exdeath. Galuf and 3 other warriors called the Warriors of Dawn sealed Exdeath 30 years ago, and now he is trying to break the crystals and escape from his seal. You later learn that Galuf is also a king in the world he is originally from. Well, not necessarily what you'd picture as a king. Galuf is strong and wise and does care about eliminating the threat of Exdeath once and for all. He's this odd mix of joker and leader that gives him a somewhat unique personality in the game. Sadly, Galuf perishes a little over halfway through the game. As the party is facing Exdeath and things are looking grim, Galuf steps up and faces off against Exdeath in an epic one-on-one where Galuf just tanks everything that Exdeath throws at him, despite being at 0 HP. This causes Exdeath to retreat, but Galuf is completely spent from the battle. While it was sad to say goodbye to the goofy warrior king, it was a pretty epic send-off for the character. He is able to bequeath his powers to his granddaughter Krill, who takes his place in the party. He also shows up at the end to help the party escape the interdimensional rift safely, along with the other warriors Dawn and King Tycoon. I really enjoyed Galuf in the game. He was a fun character, but one that was also committed to doing what he needed to protect the world. He cared about his companions and his granddaughter very much, and that is what gave him the power to go all out against Exdeath. For a while, I thought that Galuf was going to be in my first spot, but after thinking it out a bit more, that slot wound up going to a different character. And that character in the number 1 spot is Lena. Lena is one of the first characters you see in the game as she's talking to her father, the King of Tycoon, about the issues with the Wind Crystal. Despite being told not to follow him to the Wind Shrine, she doesn't listen. She follows seemingly on foot, but then gets ambushed by goblins. This is where she meets Bartz, who saves her, and Galuf, who is suffering from amnesia. While Bartz passes on following her to the Wind Shrine, Galuf decides to go with her, feeling like that was where he was heading as well. Lena is just a character that I couldn't help but like. She was committed to helping her world, she was kind, and one of the most determined characters in the game. She is the main force behind the quest at the start of the game and the journey to get to the Wind Shrine. Like a number of the characters in the game, she is very connected to an animal companion. For Lena, it is the Wind Drake Hiryu, but she shows care for wind drakes in general. Not that there's that many in the game, as there's only 2. She tends to have a habit of getting poisoned, particularly in order to try to save the wind drakes from their own perils. For example, she walks through poisonous plants to save Hiryu, and then she winds up up eating dragon grass, which is poisonous to humans, to show the Windrake in Galuf's world that it was safe to eat. You think you lose Lena after the two worlds merge together and Tycoon is attacked and consumed with the power of the void, but it turns out that Hiryu had saved her, even though she was possessed by a demon named Melusine, and Hiryu was fatally injured. While Lena has more drive and connection to the story from the very beginning, there is still a limit on how much she is developed. I still really liked her character, as I felt that without her actions, the story wouldn't have really happened in the same way, and the quest as we know it may never have actually really happened. In this way, I think she would have been a better main character than Bartz was. I feel like she has the most emotional journey out of any of the characters. The disappearance of her father at the Wind Shrine, the finding of her long-lost sister, having her father sacrifice himself for the party, the death of Galuf, and also losing Hiryu, who had selflessly rescued her from the Void's attack on Tycoon. There is a lot going on for Lena in the story, and she resolutely continues on, so I couldn't help but admire that in her character. And that's why she wound up being my favorite character of Final Fantasy V. So that's how I would rank the party members of Final Fantasy V. I know the characters here aren't quite as strong as some of the other Final Fantasy games, but I still enjoyed my time with the Warriors of Light here. How about you? Who were your favorite characters from Final Fantasy V? I'd love to hear what you think in the comments and see the different characters who were your favorite from this entry in the Final Fantasy series. That's all for this list though, so I'll see you in the next video.